पॉलिसी पैरामीटर्स हैं। इंपोर्ट बढ़ गया और इसके कारण करंट अकाउंट डेफिसिट बढ़ गई, करंट अकाउंट डेफिसिट बढ़ गई, रुपया लुढ़क गया।
Now there is a view that our investments in food security, employment guarantee and rural development are a drag on economic growth. I don't believe that there is such a trade-off.
The policies in terms of the indirect tax regime in defense are such that it favors the import rather than manufacturing.
Taxpayers' money जो है उसका wasteful expenditure जो इंडिया में हो रहा है, सड़कें बनती नहीं और बसें चलती नहीं।
GST did not get implemented, so that to my mind would have been a forward-looking legislation, bringing much more efficiency in the tax collection system.
I think the next Prime Minister of India has a huge task of making India a subsidy-free country.
We do have to work on market-based pricing for coal, market-based pricing for gas. We need to think about how to move subsidies to an arm's length and essentially make the large investments that are required viable.
India can have free trade agreements with the developing regions like Brazil, Russia and with China. So our competitiveness with respect to our competing countries can increase.
Be more focused towards the manufacturing sector so that India's exports can be boosted.
We should intensify, expand, have more and more SEZs where we can definitely create conditions for exporting things, because it's not only the domestic demand which has to go up for our manufactured items, but also the foreign demand.
Hello and welcome to Change India, an agenda for the next Prime Minister. Today in the 10th show of our series, we have 10 policy initiatives that will enable the next Prime Minister to reform India's almost chronic twin deficit problems, namely the fiscal deficit and the current account deficit. Our suggestions have been culled from recommendations made by a group of experts, and you can get all the details from our website thinkindia.in.com. Joining us in the studio are three of these distinguished contributors, all very eminent economists. Dr. Arvind Virmani, former Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. Dr. Surjit Bhalla, Chairman of Oxis Research and Investments. And joining us on a satellite link from Mumbai is Professor Ashima Goyal from the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research. And with them is our very own Dheeraj Nair, CEO of Network 18's Think India Foundation, who has anchored this project for us. We also have an audience in the studio, among whom are some people who have actively pitched into the debate on Twitter and on our website. I would urge all of you to contribute to future editions on Twitter and our website, and we would be delighted to invite you to participate in the upcoming shows. Do note that we will present our suggestions on the twin deficits and 13 other policy areas to the next Prime Minister, who takes office in June. So let's get on with points 1, 2 and 3. And these are obviously all aimed at getting the two deficits under control. The first one, if you heard the budget of the finance minister, the subsidies have gone up to about between 2.5 to 3% of GDP, depending on how you calculate them. We are saying cap those to 0.75% of GDP, so really slash them, and we are saying do it over 3 years. That's point number one. And in that, we've given a few suggestions, like you've got to move to diesel, market-linked diesel pricing very quickly. You've got to amend the food security bill so that the coverage comes down dramatically from the 70% that has been suggested in the law, that has been mandated in the law. Point number two is about the large number of centrally funded schemes, centrally sponsored schemes that we have, about 147. We are saying bring them down to 20 and ensure that each central ministry just has one big scheme. So whether it's HRD, health, urban development, rural development, just one scheme. And the third one is the 7th Pay Commission is now upon us again. We are saying that don't make it an exercise in just increasing salary levels or wage levels. Make it much more an exercise in linking productivity to the wage bill and in pruning the lower bureaucracy significantly. These are points 1, 2 and 3. Let me go across to Mumbai first and begin with Ashima.
Yes, excellent points. I think the major issue is that we have to change the composition of government expenditure, and subsidies, bringing down subsidies is really important in that context. I remember one of the past governments had promised that, recently had promised 3-4 years back that they would be capped at 2%, but they've not been able to do it. So you need to put in kind of measures that make this practical.
Yes, so the measures that we have suggested.
I think expenditure caps in general, or pay as you go, that if you are going to increase some kind of subsidy, you should show where the revenue comes from.
Right.
And the second point is that because we need to reduce our current account deficit, you need to reduce oil imports. So giving market prices for oil commodities is a really good move in terms of increasing those kind of substitution effects.
If I can just get Arvind in here. Now, you know, it's very easy for all of us to put these things down on a piece of paper. But give us a sense of how the new government which comes in will be able to get these things done. Some beginning, to be fair, has been made in transferring resources to states in the current statement of the finance minister.
Let me very quickly put a perspective on this thing. Firstly, the important objective here is to reduce the revenue deficit, which is really the counterpart of government dis-savings.
Right.
So the government is saving, it has negative savings, which has an impact on your twin deficit. You know, we'll get to the connection. I'll just mention it, but I want to mention the number is 3.3%. It's supposed to go down to 0 according to the FRBM. It never went down.
Right.
So that's one important thing which we should remember. Secondly, on the subsidies, it's important to distinguish between subsidies and transfers. Subsidies distort the price. So this is a good objective for subsidies. I would kind of keep transfers out of it, which do not distort prices, because the real problem comes from subsidies. So the thing is to educate the public about the difference. You know, people still don't understand. They take subsidies as a broad thing,
right,
and say, okay, it's going to the poor. Well, it's not going to the poor. So that's the critical part. Who is it going to? And so if you have transfers, you can make it go to the poor. We do not want these subsidies which are diffuse and distort the system.
Absolutely. Now, let me come down to the doability of this. You know, we all know this has to be done. We've given a few things. Amend the food security bill. Make market-linked pricing for energy articles. Easy to write. How will you get it done?
You know, we are now at a stage where I do not think it's going to be that difficult. Everybody is fed up, including the poor who do not get the subsidies, including people like us who say that this is just going down the corruption drain. So I think it's not going to be that difficult. Let me just... I want to make, and you know, the finance minister is already, and let's give credit to Congress where it is due, in the new budget, the interim budget, they said that, listen, almost a large part of the centrally sponsored schemes would go to the states.
That's right.
The
so
money would go to the
point number 2 actually has been largely implemented.
Now, so in your points, you know, why you want to reduce the number of centrally sponsored schemes from 147 to 20. I'm saying, why should there be any centrally sponsored schemes?
Fair enough.
Okay?
So you're going
and
to
then you have
point
that,
0.
you know, for instance, rural development should be allowed a consolidated Narega only. Right. I would rather have, let us look, this is the time, let us look at all of these expenditures, including, as you said, the food security bill.
Right.
Does that make sense to transfer? And I think Arvind made a very good point. Let's distinguish between subsidies and transfers. After distinguishing that, let us see how we can effectively transfer.
Right.
So nobody is saying, least of all Arvind, least of all me, least of all Dheeraj, that we should cut transfers. Right. But we can give it efficiently. For example, let me just give you one last example of transfers. That the water bill passed by the AAP government means that practically everybody is getting free water.
Yeah.
Now, that's a very inefficient
that's almost a perverse
method of transferring.
Yes,
it's giving money to the rich.
Right.
Let's stop giving money to the rich. Yes. Let's stop giving money to the upper middle class, and let's give money to the poor.
Okay.
And do it efficiently.
All right. So let me quickly get a couple of questions in from the audience. Quickly, who's got a question? Raise your hands. I'll take one from this side, one from this side. Anybody? There's one that side. Okay.
Yeah, the food security bill that has been passed right now. given the poor public distribution system that we have, how do you think that will make justice to that's a major chunk of the budget that has been introduced in the interim budget.
Right.
So how do you think that will go about it?
So how do we reform the food security bill? Yes.
Yes, sir. With regard to the transfers, since the direct cash transfer scheme has been rolled out, but it requires wide Aadhaar coverage, which does not actually cover most of the poor. So how do we do what you mentioned, that is ensure that the money does not go to the rich and the poor actually?
Okay. So Dheeraj, I'm going to come to you now. You've heard the experts, you've heard the audience. Sum it up for us.
Yeah, the problem, I mean, as the young lady said there, is how do you identify the poor? Now, that is a problem which Aadhaar cannot solve. Because Aadhaar is just a means of identifying who you are. Yes. So it can cut out duplicates, frauds and other kinds of things, but it can't identify you as poor or not. So that discretion still lies with the government. And as we've seen, there's a lot of controversy about identifying the exact number. But even if we were to give it a generous estimate, say 30% of the population, even then the transfer system, direct transfers, cash transfers could go to that 30%,
right,
rather than subsidies, which go to a whole lot more.
Right.
As we have discussed earlier, diesel subsidies to SUV owners. I mean, this is the kind of perverse subsidy. But the politician needs to make a case for this. He needs to go out, the Prime Minister needs to go out to the public, reach out to the public of India and say that, look, subsidies, we all love them because it gives us free stuff, but this is the reason we cannot afford them, and the rich in particular should not get them. So that strong political case needs to be made before the slashing can happen.
Yeah, and quickly on the 7th Pay Commission. I mean,
yes, the Pay Commission, we get it every 10 years. In theory, there's supposed to be productivity-linked changes, reform of the bureaucracy. None of that gets any play at all. Just the wages get increased, you know. Right. And India has an interesting system of bureaucracy where the upper layers, actually, when you talk about the elite IAS or even the foreign services, is not so big. But the lower layers of the bureaucracy are huge and largely unproductive. So until that structural change is brought about, which many administrative reforms commissions have again recommended, it's not that it hasn't been recommended.
Just has to be done.
But nobody does it. So I think the next Prime Minister said, look, I'm going to increase your wages. At least tell his top civil servants that it's not going to happen unless you commit to a reform of the structure.
Do a major VRS plan at the lower levels of the bureaucracy. We need to take a break at this stage. You go across to our website, thinkindia.in.com with your suggestions and stay right there because we'll be back after this very short break. Welcome back to Change India, an agenda for the next Prime Minister. Today we are looking at how to cure and control India's chronic twin deficits of fiscal and current account deficits. And we are on points number 4 and 5. We've already looked at how the battle axe can be taken to the subsidies in the government. But now we are looking at points 4 and 5, and these have to do with taxes. In point 4, we are saying widen the direct taxes net, lower rates, finish all exemptions, and then you can probably even bring down the corporate tax rate to about between 20 and 25%. And we are saying make a beginning in taxing agricultural income. Set the threshold high if you have to. Set it very high, but make a beginning by taxing agricultural income. And point number 5 is about reform indirect taxes. Get the GST done. Even if you have to do a deal with the states, if you have to guarantee their revenues, get it done. Let me begin with Surjit here.
This is the easiest.
Is the easiest?
This is the easiest, and I think, except for the taxing agricultural incomes, but I think you've made it correctly, the recommendation that tax at a very high level, just start. So I think both of those things are likely to happen. That is bringing the GST at the 12% level.
We've been faltering for the last 4 years.
But you know why? I've got an explanation. It's politics. And the cooperation between the two parties wasn't very strong.
What gives you the
all kinds of scandals, etc.
What gives you the confidence it's going to be different with the new Prime Minister?
Well, very good point. If we have an election which throws up a very confused decision, then we'll have even more problems. So the hope is that there isn't a confused.
So you're betting on hope right now. Let me get. You know, I just want to make that little point about GST. Why can't we do a grand bargain with the states and say we will protect your revenue, but let's get going?
See, I think the problem has been with these big ticket things, it's seen politically because everybody fears that the ruling party will say this was our big thing. You know, we've been at it. I've been involved in tax reforms from 91 onwards, every single tax reform. The thing was, it's kind of done quietly. It's in the budget. There's no big thing to claim. So to get to your GST point, What I had actually proposed was what I called a national VAT to give some flexibility. I said define 6 sales taxes which the states could have. So it's been stuck on that. It's how much flexibility. There's a real problem. Some states feel that they'll have zero flexibility in this whole system. It will kind of go to the center. So that is why I had thought very carefully about a political compromise. Unfortunately, I don't think that has been there from the beginning in the GST, though it's evolved in that direction. So it's getting to a stage where perhaps some kind of a deal is possible.
Is possible.
But we have to be flexible. You know, you have to say, okay, what is it do I want to achieve? But don't be stuck on a specific thing.
A hidebound formula.
Yeah,
Let me get Ashima in here on these 2 big points, which is widen direct taxes, abolish all exemptions, get corporate rates down to 20-25%, begin agricultural income taxes, and get GST going with some kind of flexible compromise if you have to.
Yes, I think those are just natural things to happen. And in India's case, because we are in a sort of higher growth path when it revives, and we have a lot of young, naturally we have a large tax base it can be tapped into.
Right.
And so it should be something that happens. And similarly for GST, here I think we should use our experience with the VAT, because a lot of states, some states were reluctant, but eventually it was shown that states were actually gaining revenue, and therefore the laggards also came in.
Right.
Nobody wants to be the last man standing. So just get going on this and it should work out. But also involve states in the decision. What Arvind was saying, it's a good point, because the interstate council really doesn't work as it was meant to. Have more discussion, and so that everybody has ownership and people are going into this together to the extent possible. It should not be one party, one state, one person's suggestion.
Actually, the point you make on VAT and point Arvind also made on VAT is quite relevant. I remember there used to be so many conflicts, and when the Delhi government started doing VAT, then suddenly Haryana realized and UP realized that it's something good that's happening. This is an easy one then.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the experts have already spoken, so there's not really very much for me to say. But I think everyone has a price, and I think the government has to discover what that price is. So each state will accept some deal. Now, you got to find what the deal is, whether it's in terms of money or in terms of flexibility. And I think that's what leadership is about. You explore it. And as Dr. Virmani said, I think you have to let the ownership of this be national. Let every chief minister, let every state finance minister own the GST, let them sell it to their people as something that they have all done together, rather than it being the claim of just the next prime minister or the central government. But I think that's a very big issue in terms of who will claim credit for this. And in terms of the direct taxes, I think the agricultural income one time has come. Far too many people evade the tax net by claiming agricultural income, and where their incomes are largely from land, not even farming.
That income in farmhouses.
Farmhouses and so on. So I think those people should pay tax. There's absolutely no reason why those people should.
And as we suggest, to start with a high threshold, but please
and even in corporate taxes, a lot of companies, because of exemptions, effectively pay the MAT rate, which is 18.5. So why not just get rid of the exemptions and put the tax rate at about 20?
Yeah. Okay. So now point number 6, and this is this one again has been talked about. It's been experimented with in the NDA government, but the UPA government has come and completely clamped down on it for the last 10 years. That is aggressive privatization of at least the non-core PSUs. Of course, there are people who would tell you that you should even go and do it for the core public sector units, but at least begin with the non-core PSUs. And for that, we've said that the big thing here will be to win over the labor unions. And even if you have to do very generous VRSs, take that as a cost of a fundamental reform, but go ahead and do it. Arvind.
What really pains, you know, because I was involved in the Air India stuff and we objected to that. You know, you keep investing this money, every time it says there'll be a turnaround, it all goes down the drain. And it actually hurts somebody like me to see this huge waste of money in the PSUs.
Last week, the government recapitalized HMT.
People just assume that public sector is good, is doing some good for the people. I'm sorry, that's not true. That's not what my experience for 20 years is.
Yes.
Most of it is money down the drain. So another way to look at it is the loss-making ones. You know, they are chronic loss-making. They are huge debts. Sell those. There must be, I don't know the number, but maybe 20 to 50 of them are like that. Get rid of them at least.
Even Scooters India, the government is balking at selling. I want to get Ashima in here before getting Surjit. I'm sure Surjit will have a very animated thing to say here. Ashima.
Yeah, it's really been a case of throwing good money after bad. So I think the 2 principles to be kept in mind are first competition. just get in people who are going to compete successfully. If it's a public sector firm which is competing, all right, if it's doing well. If it's not, just be ruthless and try different ways of disinvesting, privatizing, and so on.
Suji, so the deal we've said is do a deal with labor. Tell them we'll give you very generous VRS. Take it as a cost of this whole exercise. But it's such a fundamental reform that the cost is worth it. Doable?
Absolutely. You know, I think the larger point it points to, and we are ready for that, is a mindset change. I mean, you mentioned Scooters India, Ashoka Hotels.
HMT last week.
HMT. But I would say, why not BHEL? Why not all of the others? It's a mindset that needs to change. Now, we have this refreshing confession by Kejriwal, who's we all thought was very left, and he thinks that the government's business is not to be in business. So, if you will, if the Aam Aadmi Party, considered to be quite left, is saying this, the BJP, I think, is saying this, the Congress, if you will, there are large elements within it that are saying this. So, I think this election will allow this mindset change to gravitate into policy.
Right.
So, therefore, maybe I'm just being too optimistic.
Maybe
but you know, I don't know anybody who's defending these things.
That's
so
right.
we've done it, and he says it hurts, it's very obvious, the media is very, very strong on this. So I really think, and I'm very pleased you said privatization, not disinvestment. Disinvestment is an Indian word. It doesn't even exist in the English language.
That's right.
So, you know, we need to change.
Yeah,
and I think we're ready.
Dheeraj, you wanted to get in.
No, I mean, it's just a colossal waste when you think about Air India. I mean, what's going on? I always say that you need to pay someone to buy it. But you're actually pumping in so much money, and if you're pumping in so much money into it, then also make a plan to sell it at some point, right? Because otherwise it's just going to be sunk in another 10 years. You'll have to pump in another 30,000
Yeah, to think it almost got sold to Tata
To think it almost got sold. And I think
ago.
it's loss-making. Profit making is actually easier to sell because people are going to be willing to buy it.
Yes.
But just do it. I mean, and I think those days when people thought that, you know, the public sector, and this country is getting younger, as we've seen, it's getting more impatient, and people don't have this idealism of public sector. Let people make money as long as it delivers what they're supposed to for the country.
We've got a very young and impatient India sitting with us in the studio. How many of you would be in favor of getting rid of a large chunk of India's public sector undertakings? So here we have almost about 80-85%. So we still have about 15% of the socialists that need to be convinced in the audience. Maybe through the rest of the show we'll be able to do that. So 85% here saying that they would be in favor. So before we go into a break, we've got this very young and energetic audience here with us who have written out their suggestions on the Twitter handle Tell the Next PM. Please go and show the placards that you have suggestions for the next Prime Minister. Welcome back to Change India, an agenda for the next Prime Minister. Today we are focusing on the chronic twin deficits of fiscal deficit and the current account deficit and how to cure them, control them and get the Indian economy on the high growth path again. We are now on to the current account deficit. In the first two segments we've spoken about how to get the fiscal deficit under control. Now we are going to talk about the current account deficit. And our points number 7 and 8 are really to do with a lot of foreign currency market related points. The first one, the seventh one, point number 7 is really something that India's flirted with for the last almost 15 years, which is how much of the rupee should we allow it to float. We are saying we've discussed it enough. We've seen that the economy has been quite resilient. The rupee has moved from 39 to a dollar to 69 to a dollar, and this hasn't caused riots on the street. So the Indian economy has proved to be resilient. We are saying go ahead and make the rupee fully convertible. And point number 8, we are saying remove all barriers to foreign investment and foreign direct investment. Again, this country has lived with this kind of money for the last 23 years. It has not destabilized us. We had the East India mindset which said it will destabilize us. It hasn't. So we are now saying open it all up and get the flood of dollars in. I'm tempted to start with Surjit on this one.
You know, very quickly, I think I've got, if you will, a two-handed explanation or two-handed intervention on the rupee. One, I agree it should be allowed to float. That is, especially when it is weak.
Right.
Where I take a slight divergence is when the rupee starts to appreciate, and it will and it should, especially from current levels, and especially if you allow FII and FDI to be free, which I completely agree with, that you don't want the rupee to be too strong because you have to worry about your international competitiveness.
Right.
So, for example, when we allowed the rupee to go to 39, I think that was completely uncalled for. So if the rupee were to now start appreciating, goes to around 50 or so, I would then think that they should. So maybe this is one of the few times I'm not
one of the few times you're calling for intervention in the market.
Yes.
Yeah,
intelligent intervention.
So on the rupee, what was the right way which we had from 91 was a market determined rate where you dampen volatility. Somewhere in 2009 or 10, we kind of lost that and we suffered because of that. That's one. Second, FDI, 100%
So would you say the rupee should be allowed to float then?
That's right. Okay. It's called a managed float, but
yes,
it's been very clear.
He's saying the same thing.
So FDI freed, that's 100% is beneficial, as I wrote recently in an article. On FII, you have to be careful because the two are linked.
Right.
What Surjit has said about appreciation of the rupee, what we actually did wrong, very wrong, from 2010 onwards, was to have a worsening trade deficit and then open the capital account at that time.
Right.
That's the wrong thing to do because you get a flood of money which is looking for short-term profits and it appreciates going the wrong way. So your trade deficit worsens. So that's you have to be very careful. They are related. And so what happened was we lost competitiveness, we kept losing, and then you had this sharp fall.
Right.
That's very bad for the economy.
Right.
So this is a slightly technical issue, and the end result is what Surjit is saying.
Yes.
It is that when you're depreciating, you should let it depreciate, but you have to be very careful with the capital account when it starts to appreciate because you lose competitiveness.
So that's really a question of managing it. Ashima, let me come to you. I thought we would get a much more sort of a non-interventionist perspective here, but we are getting a bit of an interventionist perspective here. So you settle the debate for us.
Yeah, I think the circumstances in which we are, the sort of lessons we've got from the rest of the world and over the past few years is that a lot of the capital flows are due to global risk on and risk off, not due to our trade account deficit or stimulating our exports. So that is why you need, I agree with Surjit and Arvind, that you need some intervention to prevent too much appreciation. But at the same time, I think you need some intervention to prevent too much and too sharp depreciation also. And then second, it's the choice of freeing out to capital flows. Yes, FDI and equity. I would distinguish between equity and debt and short-term debt flows.
Right.
And here we've seen countries like Indonesia which allowed free debt flows, and they've had the largest depreciation in the recent taper on episode.
Right.
So India's choice, which is because you allow equity and foreign direct investment, they share risk. When inflows are going out, they take a knocking also. They share in the risk. In fact, this was the reason emerging markets did well after Lehman crashed, because and internationally people were saying that they've been very clever. They've passed on the risk to foreign investors.
So I think the point's well taken. Yes.
The case here for intervention has been very well made. I think the government has to be very clear and very transparent about when it's going to intervene and for what purpose it's going to intervene. At the moment, a lot of it is by stealth. You know, RBI does an intervention, nobody knows about it.
And Dheeraj, the intervention is also a free market intervention. So we're not saying you're going to do it.
So be very clear that, okay, you know, if the case has to be made that we can't let it appreciate so much, let's be transparent about it and let's outline how it's going to be done.
To actually boil it down, the real problem is short-term debt.
Right.
So that from 91 we had a very clear policy of graduated opening.
Yes.
We've still got to be careful about short-term debt. That's
and I want to get the audience in here because so lots of questions coming in here. Okay, the lady there.
This is in relation to foreign institutional investment. As we saw when Ben Bernanke almost frivolously hinted at tapering, what happened is $18 billion in very short term fled from India. That is capital flight. This is almost, you can actually draw an analogy to Asian crisis.
Right.
It was hot money in India and hot money flew. So instead of removing all the barriers, why not put a cap on debt instruments, equity, and encourage equity
Encourage
investment?
equity. Yes, exactly. I think the panel has made that point. There was another hand here, which was no one here. Okay, the gentleman here.
So my question is that you said that when the rupee is depreciating, we shouldn't go for intervention. But sir, how do you expect to do when we have the imports are pretty much inelastic in demand, and most of the imports because we need to pay more in those times.
Okay, so and the lady there.
Sir, as we know the rule that that money is power and power invites authority. So my question is to that 8th point, that inviting FDI and FII. So this economic control may lead to a political control also. If doctors of India and scientists of India in America can affect the economy of America, so can't their companies affect India, as it happened at the time of Lal Bahadur Shastri, the matter of Lal Chawal and Lal Gehu?
So there is a fear of foreign investment, and she's quoting from the 1960s when we had that whole food grain problem, and we were a much poorer country than
now we have a rotting food problem.
That's right. So we are overproducing today on cereal. Dheeraj, you've heard the comments. Wrap it up, and then we'll go to the next point.
No, I mean, there are obviously, FII is always a contentious issue when they point on hot money and stuff. But I think, if we were to say liberalize FDI completely, we'd get much more of that. So, the proportions will change, right?
Yes.
Right now, we are much more reliant on FII because we have ridiculous restrictions.
And even in FII, the country still has a debt cap. The country still hasn't opened up to FII debt, while to FII equity we are open. So, and that's the point we are saying. Get equity.
So let's improve the quality of the inflows we are getting, and it's our own fault that we have restrictions on FDI. If we liberalize them, we'll get more of FDI. So
absolutely,
it's a big market. So I think we need to correct various perversions in policy. And sure, there's nothing. Let's not be doctrinaire and say we should have no intervention, but as I said, let's be transparent about it.
Okay, so the last 2 points, points 9 and 10, refer to reforming some of our trade relationships. And point 9 is go in and do more free trade area agreements, especially with Europe and America. Now, these are difficult things. They will not happen tomorrow. But get the process going, because once you do these deals with Europe and with America, India should bargain for much greater access for its labor, for its services to those markets, and they in turn will demand much greater access to your markets. But then that's a deal that India should do. And point 10 is really an important one, and that's the trade relationship with China. You'll be surprised to know that nearly 50%, or almost between 40 and 50% of India's current account deficit could be coming from the trade imbalance with China. That is something we should urgently turn our attention to and get that sorted out, and ensure that a lot of areas in which India has competitive advantages, India has access to the Chinese market. Arvind.
See, on the first point, generally economists, free trade economists want a general agreement, not specialized ones. Okay, so in my view, a free trade agreement has a mix of political and economic. So you've got to be very clear. It's not economics, because economics means you should open up generally.
Right.
And there it's a political deal. It's a question of whether you can get a beneficial deal, because the Americans are very clear. They have their objectives and they want those in the FTA. It's not just general free trade or something. That's all nonsense, frankly.
So we need to go
if can we get a good deal, that's the issue. If we can't, then don't have it. If you can get a good deal, have it.
And China.
Now the second one, on China. China really, China is at extreme. Their whole system works for their own interests. I said something about America and Europe. China is extreme. So you have to be extra careful with China.
But you got to get it done,
the only thing which we can get from them really, which they're unlikely to give, is because their wage rates are increasing, they should be shifting their labor intensive manufacturing to India. If you can get some deal which involves that, otherwise you've got to be very wary, I'm afraid.
Well, the Chinese have been talking about it. Ashima, these 2 points from your perspective.
I agree that FTAs involve, there is a political issue there. So here, I think if India is going to go in for these, they should be careful to build some kind of template, because what happens is, I think there's a US and there's a Japanese model, and that seems to be taken in all the FTAs that are being negotiated. But G20, emerging markets in general should come together and put some of the issues that are relevant for them. Because as we are seeing in this Vodafone case, very often there are rights given to FDI which comes in, that they can't be taxed, that they have a right to earn profits and so so on. So I think for emerging markets in general, generalized trade agreements like WTO, so we should push WTO at the same time. It is important for us to be open, for that the world is open and trade takes place, because we have a young population, we want jobs and so on. And then for China, here again the bargaining issue is very, very important, and there are sort of mutual advantages now, since we are a large trading partner for them also, and potentially will be larger even in the future, because a lot of inter-Asian trade is going to grow. So think of ways in which we can push them to import more from us. This has to be done at a diplomatic level.
So Surjit, as we've seen, this is really almost all about foreign policy. But I just want you to come in with one more nuance. As we become a $2 to $3 trillion economy, India's economic heft will also go up. We can drive these things, can't we?
Plus, I'm not a big fan of free trade areas. I'm much along with what Arvind is saying. And I think the entire focus on China, that we have to do something about China, I completely disagree with. The fault is ours. 5 years ago, Chinese wages in dollar terms were the same as Indian wages.
Right.
So therefore, the solution to your China problem is internal labor reforms, market reforms, etc. Has nothing to do with China.
Open up your manufacturing.
Just open up, just be competitive. Right. Whether you sell it to China or you sell it to Pakistan, how much difference does it make to us? Or you sell it to the US? So why single out China?
This is
China is the one that has, we should learn from China. They kept wages low. Now, I'm not saying we should keep wages low, but they kept them extra competitive. The least we can do is to make ourselves competitive.
Okay, Dheeraj, you sum it up, and then I'll end with an audience.
Yeah, I think on the China point is obviously contentious, and we are definitely not in favor of curbing imports from China. I mean, that's definitely not part of our, that's not the way to do it. I mean, obviously not.
Yeah, no, we're talking about free trade here.
So,
yes.
so that's one important thing. But I mean, there's certain sectors where China has high non-tariff barriers to, for example, media is one of them. There's agriculture, there's pharmaceuticals, where India has competitiveness. So these are sort of short-term diplomatic things you can push for, and you do have the bargaining power to push for. I mean, and even with other countries, you need to push for certain things in the short term, and then there are larger issues. So free trade areas, I mean, we're not saying it has to be done in 1 month or 2 months.
This is a difficult one. We've been trying to do this for a long time.
I know,
Again, I was involved in the discussions.
But this needs economic heft, and the government of India needs to come in with heft, and there needs to be a strong leader. I want to turn to the audience. You've heard, well, we'll have to do a poll here because we are running out of time. I want to just understand from you. You've heard the panel. You've heard how difficult it is to deal with economically powerful areas like Europe and America and China. Do you think the next Prime Minister can summon the courage, the energy and the political boldness to be able to deal with these issues? If yes, raise your hand. Okay, so we have 50-50 confidence in the incoming Prime Minister. 50-50 for you, sir, or madam. We have these 10 points that we will come across and give to you when you take office. Before we go, take a look at all these 10 points.